So you're the anti-feminist woman. Tell us how you get treated and what is wrong with feminism in your opinion, and why you've joined the men's rights movement.
Well, how I get treated, what, by feminists?
Yeah.
Or they definitely, they don't really like me at all. And I guess the feeling's mutual, so I can't blame them.
What is the men's rights movement? Is it as scary as it should be? Or is there a positive side to it?
Oh, I don't think it's scary at all. And I've been to tons of men's rights events, and I've never felt under threat. I've never felt like I was in a hostile place.
So whenever I see another $200 million committed to domestic violence prevention, my fear is we're seeing another $200 million investment in the idea of the male as a violent domestic partner.
Well, one thing that I think most people aren't aware of is that whether the perpetrator is male or female, violence is almost always going to be more likely to be directed at a male than a female.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. That starts from the moment kids are ambulatory around 9 months of age, when their mothers start hitting them 2 to 3 times as often as they hit their daughters. And
so you're saying more violence against men?
Oh, more violence against men and boys than...
Throughout their childhoods?
Throughout their childhoods, into adulthood. And when you look at the actual data, the solid family violence data, there's a really good meta-analysis called the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project that took 1,700 different studies. They found that men and women are roughly equally beaten on each other, and that when it comes to unilateral violence, so that sort of domestic violence that we see in movies and that, you know, on the Lifetime channel, where it's like a horrible abuser and abusing a non-violent partner, 70% of the time that's a woman abuser and a male victim. So, I mean, these are things that are not known.
There's a big thing in Australia about rape culture. Does it exist? What's it all about?
Well, I think that there are pockets of society that you could reasonably describe as rape cultures. So, prisons. Prisons tend to be, because it's endorsed, it's almost like a part of the punishment. People do sweep it under the rug. There are, especially in juvenile facilities in the United States and Canada, I don't know if Australia is any different, there's a massive, massive problem with female staff and young male inmates, and sexual exploitation going on between those female staff and these young boys. So we do have these issues, and I would suggest that there are, you know, within gang culture, within crime culture, and drug culture, that there's definitely a problem with sexual assault. But I cannot understand
rape
why...
culture, we think universities.
Oh, yeah, but that's so ridiculous. I mean, the Department of Justice in the United States, and rape culture is very big there too, yes. Right? They came out with a report just a year or two ago, essentially indicating that women on campus, women who live on campus in the U.S., are safer than their same-age peers who are not in school.
Well, I think rapists in training is what you were talking about with Professor Sullivan there, wasn't it? That all men are rapists unless they're not, or something. What was that about?
Well, I mean, rapists, are you a rapist in training where you actually, you know, have to, I guess, go to take lessons or something like that? Just like guitar and piano and, you know, rape, or do you start off as a rapist, in which case you need to, you know, be taught not to do that. Like they can't seem to they're not very consistent in what they feel that the causes are. And I can tell you a few of the causes of particularly recidivist rapists, men who rape women, is a history of childhood sexual abuse, often by adult women.
I have to say, I sympathise with Bettina Arndt's point, who is probably the leading thinker and writer on these subjects in Australia at the moment, as you know, that the data is very, very hard to find. And I say the politicisation of the data, the suppression of data that we don't sort of like the result, is very, very widespread in this whole area in which you're working. How do you describe the data quality?
Well, it really depends. I mean, like, if you're relying on Google, it's going to be very, very difficult to find a lot of the stuff that I talk about. There are sources that I used to have on my old computer that fried, and I have not. I've gone looking for them using keywords and even entire sentences in quotes and not been able to find them on Google now.
So the question is, Karen, are women still being oppressed by men throughout all of our culture? And if so, are the feminists right to keep banging that drum?
Well, okay, that assumes that I believe that women were oppressed by men at some point.
Were they?
Well, I mean, even if you look at one of those quotes from the Declaration of Sentiments, if married, the law, man has made her in the eye of the law civilly dead. No, not at all. She was considered a different citizen if married, but how can you have a list of legal entitlements and exemptions from obligations and responsibilities without actually being considered a person under the law?
So the man's life was worth far less than the woman's. Explain your thinking there.
Well, I mean, not just to protect women, but to protect the interests of the powerful, right? And so men often had no choice. They were drafted, and they still have no choice in all kinds of places in the world in terms of being sort of forcibly conscripted into militias and things like that. So what you essentially have is, I mean, yes, there were different roles for men and women. They were treated very differently. And I don't necessarily think that I think that a lot of that is obsolete now and it needs to go away. But when you look at the average life of a average man and an average woman, I don't think that 200, 300 years ago, there were a whole lot of women feeling like their husbands were oppressing them through the institution of marriage, and I don't think that there were a whole lot of women feeling like they had the worst deal, that they would willingly trade places with their husbands or their sons.
Where do you think this human impulse of the male and the female to, in effect, make a binding, lifelong contractual commitment, where does that come from?
Well, that is actually a really interesting question because humans, our sociosexual organization is different from any other mammal and specifically from any other primate. For a social species to mate monogamously, you usually have a situation like wolves where only the top two are allowed to get down and do the business, and everybody else is just supposed to contribute to helping raise those offspring. And we do things differently. Everybody gets a chance to pair up, you know, within reason. And even in cultures that allow polygamy or polygyny, it's more specifically called multiple wives, most of the matings are monogamous, lifelong bonds. So what's
the motive for it?
Oh, the motive for it is essentially our children are so helpless beyond, you know, in terms of the length of time, not just in terms of when they first are born, they're much more helpless than almost any other mammal infant, but that it takes so long for them to even be able to be trusted to walk around and not walk off a cliff or eat the poisonous berries, be unsupervised. Our brains take a huge amount of caloric investment because they've gotten so big and so busy. And so there really does need to be a biparental influence and contribution.
So
and
it's a way to bind the male to the biological unit of mother and children.
Yes, absolutely. Marriage was designed the way it was in order to ensure that men could be held responsible for the children that they sired, and also so that men would not be held responsible for other men's children.
So what happens then with same-sex marriage? Does that not break this whole process back down again?
I don't think that same-sex marriage is going to, I don't think it's going to become the fad for everyone. I think that because it's concentrated in such a small portion of the population, I think that the possible benefits, particularly to men, in terms of when same-sex divorces happen, and maybe the template will shift in terms of being more equal in terms of child custody, more equal in terms of responsibility.
Do you think once gay men get control of family law, it'll improve for blokes?
No, I think that because If the argument is that mothers are favored in terms of custody,
yes,
and fathers are overwhelmingly required to pay alimony and child support,
yes,
what do you do when you have two dads or two mothers? How do you do that? Well, that's hopefully going to be a more equitable split of obligations and responsibilities and benefits.
Apparently,
among tertiary educated Australian females, something like a very large group of them will never marry or have children, not because they chose to, but because they discovered when they got to that moment of needing to find a partner that they just didn't have the time, they didn't have the available candidates, and they wound up falling through the fertility cracks.
Well, I think this is one of the biggest consequences of the feminist philosophy and the feminist way of doing things is, you know, they sort of say, well, you can do anything a man can do, so that's what you should do, and you should do it exactly the way a man would. Well, yeah, except for you are much more likely to get pregnant in your early to mid-20s than at any other time in your life. Your fertility starts to decline after that. After 35, you can start to run into serious problems. And complications and things like that with pregnancies. If you wait longer and longer to have your first child, you have a higher risk of complications.
But I would say that feminist leadership has sought to shame women in such a way that if you turned up at 23 and said, look, I'm at my maximum fertility, I've got this male, I really like him, I'd like to build something with him, so we're going to have a baby now, I think you would get the pressure.
Why are you ruining your life?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so, and then she ends up single at age 40 with a bunch of cats and feels like she's ruined her life.
Well, in this patriarchal world, this world where even the best men engage in casual and ingrained sexism, how will I raise a son who respects me the way a daughter would, who sees a woman as just like himself? So she went on to say she actually felt sick at the thought of having a boy rather than a girl, and this threw her a huge quandary, and she wrote a long article about it.
I don't understand how, like, we're monsterizing men, and we're doing it right from the time that they haven't even been born yet. And they're these potential monsters that we have to somehow steer away from becoming horrible, horrible people. But on the other hand, I don't think that she would like if men treated women the way they treat men, if they saw women the way they... I think that women... there was a beautiful study by a feminist out of the University of Waterloo. It was a master's project. She did a couple of experiments, and she showed vignettes of men and women interacting and men interacting, and asked people to try to describe how sexist they thought the man was. And when the man treated the woman the way he would treat another man, he was considered hostily sexist. He was considered more likely to beat his wife, deny a woman a promotion just based on sex, all of those horrible, nasty things. If he treated her better, he was seen as being non-sexist. I think women have a huge blind spot when it comes to how men are treated. And if they had to live one day... There's a beautiful woman named, lesbian woman named Nora Vincent. She wrote a whole book on this. She spent 18 months going out several times a month in drag as a man and living as a man. She got involved in a bowling league with a bunch of other guys. She tried to date women and all of these things. And she had a nervous breakdown. She had to check herself into a mental institution. She said she felt like killing herself. And she said, I feel privileged to be a woman.
But she'd been asked in an interview, are you a feminist? And she said she said she wasn't, because all the feminists that she spent time with were unhappy. And I want to know, does feminism make women unhappy, or does it just attract unhappy women?
Well, I think there's a little column A, a little column B there. I think that it attracts unhappy women. The personal is political. It was a huge feminist slogan in the second wave, and they essentially said that, or Erin Pitsey again, she said that basically means if my dad's a jerk, all men are jerks, and you politicize it. But when you also look at what the ideology, what, you know, women's studies courses and stuff teach you about the world.
Yeah.
They're telling you the world's all out to get you, and men have so much more than you, and they're so much luckier than you, and it's all because of this thing about yourself that you can't change, and life is just going to suck for you, because, and it's going to be so difficult, and nobody's getting, and misogyny everywhere. And that can't be a very happy message to take out into the world. I
seriously have a concern. We've had a significant outbreak of depression among young girls, school-age girls. We've had a number of, like, elite private schools. Girls have been committing suicide. There's depression everywhere. There's all these visits to counsellors taking place with sort of every parent you talk to, one of their children is having a depressive episode. Do you worry that this sort of doctrine, this curriculum, this unrelenting emphasis on the misogyny of the male is causing depression among females?
Oh, I think it's causing all kinds of problems among both boys and girls and young men and young women, because it can't be very pleasant to sit in a school gymnasium and hear about how, you know, you're a 9-year-old boy, now take responsibility for wife battering, right, and make a pledge that you'll never do it. I mean, that's a horrible, horrible situation to put a young boy in, too.
Yeah,
but you look at this sort of one-sided barrage of antagonistic sentiment towards boys. And this is what gets me, is that it's one thing to be a man and to, you know, be sort of secure in yourself and to watch that commercial and go, ha, 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 you know, or whatever. But when you're a 5-year-old boy, let's say you're a 5-year-old boy who doesn't have a dad in your house, right, and whose first daily male role model is probably going to be your grade 8 math teacher, right? Because you're going to be raised with nothing but women around you.
If you have maths teachers in your schools in Canada who are male, you know, we've got lots and lots of Australian schools where there's no male to be seen anywhere.
I know, and so you are literally having this situation where boys are growing up with, there are no positive messages about men other than maybe superhero movies and comics and stuff like that, which are just, apparently the feminists say those are the toxic masculinity roles that we don't want boys to grow into.